In a faraway land, nestled between dry hills and cracked earth, there stood a village where daily life was measured not by joy or stories but by the weight of endless tasks. From sunrise to sunset, the women and girls of this place bent their backs, their hands raw from scrubbing, their shoulders sore from carrying burdens, their feet hardened by miles of walking with heavy loads. In this village, work was not just labor, it was an inheritance, passed down from mother to daughter like an unbroken chain. The men would sit beneath the shade of trees or gather in groups to talk, their voices carrying laughter and idle arguments, while the women moved silently like ants, balancing pots of water, bundles of wood, or baskets of grain. The cycle of work left no room for dreams, and in its harsh rhythm, one girl found herself singled out more cruelly than the rest. She was not born into ease. Her mother had died when she was small, leaving her in the care of a stepmother whose heart seemed made of stone. The stepmother wore her bitterness like a crown, and whenever she looked at the girl, her lips curled in disdain. She gave her no kindness, no comfort, and certainly no rest. Every day began with insults and ended with exhaustion. "You are slow," the woman would sneer. "You are clumsy. Even a broken broom would sweep better than you." The girl never answered back, for her silence was her only shield, but inside her chest a quiet ache grew, a yearning for someone to see her as more than just a pair of hands to be used. The villagers too were no better. They had grown accustomed to cruelty as though it were part of the air they breathed. They saw the girl's struggles and instead of pity they laughed. Gossip spread through doorways and market stalls. "That child cannot even finish simple tasks," one woman would chuckle. "Her mother's spirit must be ashamed," another would add. Children learned from their parents' scorn, pointing and mimicking her clumsy movements as if mocking her suffering were a game. Her presence became entertainment, her hardship a story retold for amusement. It was in this cruel setting that the stepmother devised her most wicked order yet. One morning, when the sun was already burning hot and the air smelled of dust, she handed the girl a clay pot. At first it looked like any other vessel used to fetch water, but as the girl held it up, her heart sank. A thin crack ran along the side, faint but long, a wound in the clay that promised to betray its purpose. Water would never stay within it. It was not just a difficult chore, it was an impossible one. "Take this pot," the stepmother commanded, her voice sharp as a whip. "Go to the well and bring it back full. If you return with it empty, you shall go without food today. If you return with only a little, I will send you back again and again until you learn to do it properly." The girl's lips parted to speak, but no words came out. She knew it was useless. Any protest would only invite harsher punishment. So she lowered her eyes, cradled the broken vessel against her hip, and began the long walk to the well. Behind her, laughter erupted. Neighbors had gathered, curious to watch. Some leaned against doorposts, others clapped their hands at the cruelty of the command. They whispered to one another, their voices carrying the thrill of mockery. "Look at her," someone said, pointing. "Even her pot leaks just as she leaks away her worth." Another voice added, "Let us see how many times she must walk before she learns." Their laughter followed her footsteps, echoing louder than the buzzing flies. The road to the well was rough, lined with thorns and stones that cut at her feet, but she kept walking, her eyes fixed on the shimmering distance where water lay hidden beneath the earth. Every step carried with it a weight not just of the pot but of humiliation. She could feel the eyes of the village burning into her back even long after she had left their sight. At the well, she lowered the pot carefully into the water, listening to the hollow sound of it filling, hearing for a moment the sweet promise of success. The pot grew heavy in her hands, but as she lifted it, she saw thin streams already escaping, trickling down her arms, falling into the thirsty soil below. She pressed her palm against the crack, but the water still slipped away, stubborn and relentless. She carried it anyway, each step a battle against despair. By the time she reached the halfway mark, the pot was half empty. By the time she neared the village, it was nearly dry. The waiting crowd erupted in cruel laughter as they saw her return, her arms soaked but the pot barely holding a sip of water. "See? Even the earth drinks before it reaches her home," they mocked. The stepmother folded her arms, her mouth twisted in a smile that was more dangerous than anger. "Again," she ordered coldly. "Go again. Do not stop until you learn." And so she turned back, her body weary, her heart aching. Each trip to the well was not only a test of strength but a trial of spirit. Each time she filled the pot, each time she watched it betray her, she felt the weight of the villagers' scorn pressing heavier on her shoulders than the clay itself. But somewhere deep inside, a strange feeling flickered, a quiet defiance, fragile yet unbroken. For though they mocked her and though the pot leaked, she still walked. She still carried. She still endured. The command came like a whip across her back, not spoken in kindness but with the sharp edge of mockery. Each morning, as the sun stretched its golden arms across the horizon, the girl would hear the voice of her stepmother rise above the clamor of the waking village. Take the pot, the broken one. Go fetch the water. It was not simply a chore but a sentence meant to humiliate. The pot had cracks that had grown wide with time, lines like scars running across its clay surface. Everyone knew it leaked. By the time she reached the well and walked back toward the village, most of the water would be gone, dripping steadily into the thirsty earth. The other women gathered at the well often stopped to watch her, their laughter cutting deeper than the sharp edge of the broken clay. Look at her, they would say. She cannot even bring back a single pot of water. What use is she? Their voices swirled like smoke, choking her spirit. Even the children ran behind her sometimes, clapping their hands and chanting as the water streamed through the cracks, leaving a trail behind her like tears falling from a hidden wound. Her arms would ache under the weight of the pot, though in truth it carried less water than it should. Still, the journey seemed longer with each passing day. The sun pressed against her back, the dust stung her bare feet, and the ridicule followed her like a shadow she could not escape. Each time she returned, her stepmother would shake her head in feigned disappointment. "Is this all?" she would ask, lifting the nearly empty pot as if it proved the girl's worthlessness. "How will this house survive if you cannot even carry water?" The villagers nodded, their eyes glinting with amusement, their laughter ringing out like a drumbeat of shame. But the girl did not speak back. She lowered her gaze and accepted the cruelty in silence. Every crack in the pot seemed to echo her own heart, broken and patched together by endurance alone. Yet she carried it still, day after day, never refusing the cruel command. Some whispered that she was too weak, too simple to fight back. Others thought she had no pride left. But inside her, something stronger stirred, though it lay hidden beneath layers of quiet suffering. What the villagers never noticed was the earth beneath her feet. As she walked, the leaking water trickled down, seeping into the soil, disappearing without sound. Yet along her path, the ground was never as dry as elsewhere. Little shoots of green began to appear where her footsteps fell, unnoticed by those too busy laughing at her struggle. Still, for now, her pain was all anyone chose to see. The cruel command became a spectacle for the village. Each morning as she set out, there would be smirks and whispered jokes. Will she bring back half a cup today? Or none at all? The stepmother delighted in the ritual humiliation, finding power in the girl's endurance. It was a performance repeated endlessly, the broken pot, the endless walk, the dripping water, the returned emptiness. And through it all, the girl carried herself with quiet determination, though her heart bore the weight of more than clay. Her humiliation was not merely in the task, but in the way it robbed her of dignity before the eyes of her people. To stumble under the load, to return each day with less than she had gathered, to see mocking smiles waiting at the doorway, these became her daily companions. Even in the night, when she lay down to rest, she heard the laughter in her dreams, echoing like a curse she could not escape. And yet, in the silence of her heart, she held on to something no one could see, a patience that did not break, a will that did not bow. The cruel command was meant to destroy her spirit, to make her believe in her own worthlessness. But each step she took with that broken pot became a step into something greater, though the villagers could not imagine it. For in their laughter, they failed to see what was truly being carried, not the water alone, but the strength of a girl who would one day turn shame into something none of them could forget. The path to the river stretched longer each day, or so it felt to the girl who carried the leaking pot against her hip. Her stepmother's words echoed in her ears, cold, sharp, and meant to slice her spirit. Go. If you want to eat in this house, you'll bring water with that pot. Or starve. She knew the villagers were watching as she set off, their eyes like thorns in her back. Some whispered, others chuckled openly, expecting to see her return empty-handed, defeated. She tried to ignore them, but the humiliation stuck to her like dust on her skin. Every step away from the village made her chest heavier, as though the pot itself was not the burden but the shame it represented. The walk was long, winding through narrow trails lined with dry shrubs, thorny branches tugging at her ankles. The earth beneath her feet was cracked, baked by the sun and hot enough to sting her soles. Yet she pressed forward, her breath shallow, her heart heavy with doubt. Why me? Why always me? She whispered, though no one answered. Each drop of water that leaked from the pot in her hand seemed like her spirit draining away, drop by drop, piece by piece. She clenched the handle tighter, her knuckles white with the effort, as though squeezing harder might keep the water in place. But no matter how firmly she held on, the cracks in the clay betrayed her. When she finally reached the thick cluster of trees near the river, the air shifted. It was cooler there, shaded, filled with the earthy scent of damp soil. For a moment, it felt as though the forest itself sighed with her, sharing in her exhaustion. A breeze stirred gently, brushing her damp cheeks and cooling her forehead. She paused, sitting on a smooth stone, clutching the pot to her chest. "Why must I always fail?" she muttered, her voice trembling, the words almost swallowed by the quiet rustle of leaves. But the trees swayed as though disagreeing, their branches reaching toward her in gentle acknowledgement. She rose and continued, her body aching, her spirit frayed. As she drew closer to the river, the chirping of birds grew louder, their calls carrying a strange tenderness. Some perched along her path, tilting their small heads at her as though listening to her unspoken thoughts. A pair of doves fluttered from branch to branch, almost as if they were guiding her, keeping her company on her lonely journey. Their soft coos reminded her of lullabies long forgotten, songs her real mother once sang before the cruel stepmother took her place. The memories burned her eyes with tears she quickly blinked away, for she could not afford to cry when her task already felt impossible. At last she reached the edge of the river. The water gleamed in the sunlight, stretching endlessly, calm yet alive with gentle ripples. She knelt, her trembling hands lowering the pot into the cool current. The clay absorbed the water greedily, filling, brimming, heavy. For a moment she smiled faintly, perhaps this time she might succeed. But when she lifted the pot, she saw the steady trail of droplets escaping once more, marking her path back even before she began. Her shoulders slumped, and despair coiled tight around her chest. The return journey was worse. Each step back toward the village felt heavier than the last. The pot leaked with stubborn persistence, water slipping through the cracks no matter how she shifted it, no matter how carefully she held it. She imagined the villagers laughing already, mocking her soaked dress, her empty vessel. Her mind swirled with cruel images of their smirks, of her stepmother's scornful eyes. The thought made her stumble, her knees scraping against the dirt as she fell. The pot rolled slightly from her grip, spilling even more of its precious contents. She cradled it quickly, her tears mingling with the few droplets that still remained. "Why do you hate me so?" she asked the pot, her voice choked and breaking. But as she sat on the dusty ground, the wind rose again, brushing softly against her face like a mother's touch. The tall grass bent toward her, as though bowing in solidarity, and the trees behind her whispered encouragement in the language of rustling leaves. The river's distant song hummed like a promise, and the birds circled above, refusing to leave her side. For a moment she felt less alone, as if the world itself was listening, holding her grief, urging her not to give up. She picked herself up slowly, clutching the pot with renewed determination, her steps unsteady but persistent. By the time she reached the edge of the village, the water inside the pot was nearly gone. Only a shallow pool glistened at the bottom, mocking her effort. She could already hear faint laughter in the distance, a reminder of the scorn that awaited her. But as she stepped forward, the cool breeze wrapped around her again, and the chorus of birds trailed behind her, reminding her she was not entirely abandoned. Though her journey had been lonely, painful, and filled with doubt, nature itself had walked with her, and somewhere deep in her heart she knew the river had not sent her back empty-handed. She stood at the river's edge, the broken pot trembling in her hands, the cool water shimmering under the sunlight. For a moment, as she dipped the pot into the stream, she felt a fragile hope rise inside her. Maybe, just maybe, she could make it work this time. The pot filled quickly, the water rising high to the brim, and as she lifted it onto her head, a few droplets ran down her cheeks, mingling with her sweat. The weight was familiar, she had carried water before, but this time it was different. She knew with each step the cracks would betray her, spilling everything she worked so hard to gather. Yet she clenched her jaw, took a deep breath, and began the long walk home. At first the pot held its secret. A few drips slid down her arm, barely noticeable. She tightened her grip, walked slowly, and tried to imagine the look of surprise on the villagers' faces when she returned with a full pot. But as the path grew longer, the cracks widened with the strain, and the water began to slip away, streaming down her legs and leaving a wet trail behind her. By the time she reached halfway, her steps were already heavier, not because of the weight of the pot but because of the crushing truth settling in her heart. She could hear laughter in her mind, echoes of cruel voices that had mocked her that morning. Still she pressed on, determined to at least show them her effort. When she finally entered the edge of the village, the first child saw the dripping pot and shouted for the others. Heads turned and soon a crowd began to gather. Mothers stopped their weaving, men paused their work, and girls her age pointed at her with mocking smiles. By the time she reached the center of the village, her pot was nearly empty. Only a shallow pool of water clung stubbornly to the bottom, as though mocking her struggle. And then, just as she feared, the laughter began, loud, merciless, ringing through the air like drums of humiliation. "Look at her," someone jeered. "She cannot even carry water with both hands." "Her mother's daughter," another voice said, the words dripping with scorn. "Good for nothing, just like the one who gave her life." Their laughter tore at her, each sound a sharp thorn piercing deeper into her chest. The shame pressed down heavier than the empty pot. She lowered her eyes, unable to look at them, and wished the earth would open up and swallow her whole. The children began to mimic her, pretending to carry invisible pots, staggering dramatically, then spilling imaginary water to the ground as they burst into cruel laughter. The sight made her cheeks burn and tears threatened to spill. But even in her humiliation, something inside her refused to break completely. She clutched the pot tighter, holding it against her chest as if it were proof of her struggle. She whispered softly to herself, words no one else could hear, "I will try again. I must." Her stepmother stepped forward, her voice slicing through the laughter. "Tomorrow you will do it again," she declared, her eyes flashing with cold satisfaction. "And the next day and the next until you learn your place. A girl who cannot carry water has no worth in this world." The girl swallowed hard, nodding silently though her throat ached. She wanted to scream to tell them how unfair it was, but her voice caught inside her, trapped beneath the weight of their judgment. She lifted her gaze for a brief second, looking toward the distant hills, toward the river that had silently welcomed her earlier. The memory of the trees swaying, the birds' gentle calls, and the river's calm murmur lingered in her heart. Out there she was not mocked. Out there the world had seemed to listen. When the laughter finally died down and the crowd dispersed, she remained standing alone in the dusty square. Her pot was empty now, her arms trembling from the effort, her feet sore from the long walk. Yet there was a strange flicker in her chest, a spark that had not been extinguished by their cruelty. It was fragile, but it was there, whispering that she should not give up. That night, as she lay on her thin mat, the sound of laughter still haunted her ears. Every cruel word replayed, sharper than a knife. She turned her face to the wall, tears soaking into the straw beneath her, but in her heart she began to weave a quiet vow. She would walk to the river again. She would try again. She would not let their scorn destroy her. The memory of the dripping water, of the trail left behind her, felt like a scar etched into her pride. Yet it also reminded her that she had made it halfway, that she had carried more than they believed she could. Tomorrow she would step onto the same path, carry the same broken pot, and face the same cruel stares. And though they expected her to fail, she would not stop trying. For somewhere deep inside, beyond the shame and sorrow, a small voice whispered that there was meaning even in her persistence, and that someday they would see it too. The sun was already high by the time she reached the river. Its heat pressed against her skin like a punishment, but she dared not falter. In her hands she carried the broken pot, its cracks thin as scars, but cruel enough to mock her efforts. The villagers had given her this task not because it needed. That night, the village lay beneath a heavy silence, broken only by the distant chirping of insects and the restless wind that passed through the tall grass like a whisper. She sat alone outside the small hut where she was allowed to sleep, the broken pot resting beside her as though it, too, had been condemned to shame. The laughter of the villagers still echoed in her ears, as sharp and cutting as if it had only just left their mouths. Each step she had taken earlier that day had been marked with ridicule, every drop of water spilling from the pot greeted with cruel amusement. Even now, long after the sun had set, she felt the weight of those eyes upon her, heavy as stones pressing down on her chest. She wrapped her arms around her knees and buried her face, allowing the tears she had held back all day to flow freely. They came slowly at first, burning against her skin as though the sorrow itself carried fire, then faster, heavier, until her shoulders shook with the force of her grief. She cried not only for the humiliation of the day but for the loneliness that had wrapped itself around her since childhood, for the burden of always being different, for the ache of carrying a pot that seemed to mirror her own life, full of cracks, always leaking, never whole. Her tears fell onto the earth in dark patches, sinking quickly into the dust. But some of them touched the broken pot lying beside her. She did not notice at first, so lost was she in the storm of her own despair. Yet something began to stir where her tears met the clay. A faint shimmer, delicate as the wing of a firefly, flickered along the cracks. The glow was so soft it could have been mistaken for a trick of the moonlight. She lifted her head slowly, her sobs caught in her throat, and her eyes widened. The pot was glowing. Not brightly, not enough to illuminate the night, but enough for her to see faint lines of light weaving their way through the scars in the clay. It was as if her tears had awoken something hidden deep inside it, something ancient and alive. The glow pulsed faintly, like a heart learning to beat again, flickering in rhythm with her breath. She reached out with trembling fingers, brushing the surface of the pot where the cracks now glimmered faintly. The clay was warm, warmer than it had been when she carried it back from the river, as though it held a secret fire inside. She drew her hand back quickly, fear and wonder warring within her. Was this a curse? A sign from the ancestors? Or perhaps just her tired eyes betraying her after a day of toil and humiliation? She wiped her face with the back of her hand, trying to clear the blur of tears, but when she looked again, the glow was still there, faint but steady. The pot, broken as it was, seemed to breathe with her. Her heartbeat quickened. The villagers had always said the cracked pot was useless, that it could never hold water, just as they whispered that she was useless, unfit, too weak for their world. And yet here it was, answering her tears with light. The thought made her chest tighten, not with shame this time but with something else, something dangerously close to hope. The night air grew colder, the stars sharp and brilliant overhead, but she could not bring herself to move inside. She sat watching the pot, waiting to see if the glow would fade, if the miracle was only momentary. Time passed in silence, save for the rustle of leaves and the distant cry of a night bird. The glow dimmed at times, flickering like a candle struggling against the wind, but it never completely disappeared. Each time it weakened, another tear of hers would fall upon it, and the cracks would respond, brightening again as though feeding on her sorrow. A realization dawned on her. Her tears, the very thing the villagers mocked as weakness, were the key to awakening the pot. The cracks, instead of being a flaw, were the very channels through which the light escaped, painting the night with soft lines of gold. What had been shame now revealed a secret beauty. She leaned closer, her breath slow, her eyes filled with a cautious wonder. Could it be that she, too, carried something within her that others could not see? Something that only revealed itself through pain and persistence? The thought unsettled her, but it also warmed her like an ember-catching flame. Eventually, exhaustion pulled her down and she lay beside the pot, her hand resting lightly on its surface. The glow still pulsed faintly under her palm, like the heartbeat of an old friend who refused to leave her side. Sleep came slowly, carrying her away on a tide of dreams filled with rivers of light and shadows fleeing before her tears. In the quiet hours before dawn, the villagers slept soundly, unaware of the strange magic stirring just outside their huts. They would wake to another day of gossip and laughter at her expense, never knowing that in the night, while they mocked her memory, something extraordinary had begun to awaken in the cracks of a broken pot and the heart of a broken girl. When the first bird sang and the sky blushed with the colors of dawn, she opened her eyes. The glow was still there, faint but undeniable, etched into the clay like veins of living fire. She touched it again, this time without fear, and whispered into the morning air, not a prayer, not a promise, but a fragile acknowledgement that maybe, just maybe, her tears were not wasted after all. The next morning, with heavy eyes and a body still aching from yesterday's ridicule, she took up the cracked pot once more. Her hands trembled slightly as she held it against her chest, but her resolve had not broken. The memory of the glow she had seen in the quiet of the night lingered in her thoughts, strange and mysterious, like a whisper of promise meant only for her. Though her heart still carried the weight of shame, there was also a spark, a question she could not silence. Perhaps the pot was not just broken. Perhaps it carried something more. She set out toward the river, the familiar path stretching before her like a trial she had already failed. The villagers watched again as they always did, their eyes following her every step. Some leaned on doorways with smirks tugging at their lips, while others openly laughed, their voices carrying through the air. She heard them mutter that she was foolish, too stubborn to give up on a pot that had betrayed her. Yet she pressed forward, refusing to let their scorn stop her. The wind stirred gently, brushing against her face as though in quiet encouragement, and the leaves above rustled in soft harmony with her footsteps. She felt, for a fleeting moment, that the earth itself wanted her to keep going. At the riverbank, she bent low, dipping the cracked pot into the cool, flowing water. The sound of it filling was like a heartbeat, steady, full, alive. She lifted it carefully, balancing the weight against her hip. Already she could see tiny streams seeping through the cracks, sliding down its side and dripping to the ground. A pang of despair clenched her chest. She knew how this would end. Yet she started back, each step heavy but determined. As the water trickled away, she noticed something strange along the path. Where the droplets fell, the soil seemed to stir. At first she thought it was her tired eyes playing tricks on her, but soon tiny green shoots pushed through the earth. She stopped in disbelief, her breath catching in her throat. Each drop that fell left behind not just damp soil but life itself. The shoots stretched higher, unfurling into delicate flowers that glowed faintly in the morning light. Bright colors began to line her path, soft whites, radiant yellows, deep blues, flowers blooming where none had grown before. Her heart pounded. Could it be? Was this the pot's secret, the glow she had seen in the night now revealing itself in daylight? She almost wanted to laugh, a sound caught between joy and disbelief. For the first time she didn't feel ashamed of the cracks. She saw them as veins carrying beauty into the earth. She slowed her steps, almost reverent now, watching the blossoms follow her. The path she had once dreaded became transformed, every mocking step now matched with quiet magic. But the villagers did not see. They were too caught up in their own cruel entertainment. From afar they laughed louder than ever, pointing at the trail of wet soil left behind. They mocked her for losing the water again, for daring to repeat her failure. Not one of them bent close enough to notice the small miracles rising in her wake. Their voices carried harshly, telling her she was cursed with uselessness, blind to the beauty she was leaving behind. Her cheeks burned as the sound of their laughter reached her, sharper than any blade. She wanted to cry, but the sight of the flowers gave her strength. She pressed onward, step after step, watching the petals open wider under the sun. The blooms swayed as if bowing to her, whispering a truth the others could not hear, that her persistence was not in vain. That the brokenness of the pot was not a weakness but a gift. When she finally reached home, the pot was nearly empty once again, just as before. But this time she did not feel the crushing weight of defeat. She glanced back at the path she had walked, now transformed into a living ribbon of blossoms. It stretched all the way to the river, glowing softly in the light, a secret known only to her. Her lips curved into the smallest smile, tender and fragile but real. For the first time since the villagers' scorn began, she did not see herself as a failure. She saw herself as part of something larger, something the villagers' eyes were too blind to see. She set the pot down and placed her hands gently against its cracked sides. "You're not broken," she whispered, voice trembling with awe. "You're alive." The pot seemed to hum beneath her palms, faint and warm as if it understood. That night, she slept not with tears, but with the image of flowers blooming behind her still vivid in her mind, a secret she carried close to her heart, waiting for the day others would finally see. She rose with the dawn, her body aching from countless failures, yet something deep within her refused to give in. The pot, though cracked and ridiculed, had become part of her burden and her hope. That morning, as she dipped it into the river once more, she felt its familiar weight settle into her arms. The villagers watched from a distance, whispering, laughing, expecting the same comedy of drips and spills that had turned her struggle into their entertainment. She ignored them, her focus narrowed to the feel of the cool water pressing against her palms as she lifted the pot. But this time something was different. The cracks did not immediately bleed the water away. Instead, as she carried it, the vessel seemed to grow heavier, fuller, as if resisting the ordinary rules of emptiness and loss. Each step she took made the pot slosh and tremble, but instead of draining, water seemed to rise higher. She gasped when a trickle spilled over the rim, not through the broken seams but over the top. Soon, the trickle turned to rivulets streaming down her arms. By the time she reached the dusty road leading into the village, water cascaded freely, soaking the earth beneath her feet. The villagers, expecting another pitiful scene, fell silent. They saw her, a girl with a pot cracked and useless in their eyes, walking as if burdened by a river itself. The air smelled of fresh rain, and the ground where her feet touched darkened with life. Children ran after her, holding out cupped hands to catch the water spilling from her vessel. It was clear, cool, and sweet, purer than anything drawn from the village wells. They drank, their lips trembling in disbelief, and cried out with joy. The laughter of mockery that had once echoed against her ears was replaced by startled gasps and shouts. Old women rushed forward, their parched throats soothed as the water kissed their tongues. Mothers dipped rags into the overflow and pressed them against their children's foreheads, watching fevers break as if touched by healing spirits. Men, once loud in their jeers, stood dumbfounded as they watched the earth beneath her revive. The dusty fields on the edge of the village, long dry and cracked from the cruel seasons, began to stir as water ran across them. Seeds thought long dead awakened, tiny shoots of green pushed upward through the softened ground. The barren soil drank greedily, and the sight of life returning left even the hardest hearts shaken. Cattle wandered closer, drawn by the scent of freshness, their tongues lapping at the rivulets running off her hands. The girl herself trembled, not from weakness but from awe, as if she too could hardly believe the miracle she carried. "Enough!" one elder cried, rushing forward. "You will waste it." But the words sounded hollow, meaningless, for the water would not stop. It spilled and poured, endless, defying every limit they thought they knew. The pot had become a spring, a living source, and it chose to flow only while it rested in her hands. When another villager tried to take it, reaching greedily for its rim, the water stilled, the glow faded, and the pot returned to its brittle silence. Startled, they stepped back, murmuring among themselves, and she understood. The miracle was not in the clay alone, but in her bond with it. She walked to the village square, where the sick and weary often gathered. Without words, she tilted the pot just slightly, letting streams of water wash over them. Wounds closed. Dry, cracked lips softened. Eyes once glazed with suffering shone again. The cries that rose were no longer scornful but worshipful, a chorus of gratitude and disbelief. Yet she did not bask in it, she only held the pot closer, her face streaked with tears that mingled with the endless water. She had wanted nothing more than to prove she was not broken, that even with her scars and shame, she had a place. Now she stood as the bearer of something greater, something the villagers themselves had never imagined. As the sun climbed higher, the square transformed. Children splashed in puddles that formed at her feet. Crops revived in fields nearby. The scent of damp earth and blooming life filled the air, overpowering the bitterness of drought and despair. Even the river seemed to roar louder that day, as if celebrating its hidden gift revealed. The villagers bowed their heads, humbled. Where once they had mocked her persistence, they now saw her as chosen. They whispered of spirits, of blessings, of destiny written not in strength or beauty but in resilience. She, the girl they had laughed at for carrying a leaking pot, had become the one who quenched their thirst, healed their wounds and revived their land. She looked down at the pot, cracked and fragile still, its imperfections untouched. Yet from those flaws had sprung abundance. She understood then. Her own wounds, her own scars, were not curses but vessels waiting for the right moment to overflow. And in that moment, with water spilling endlessly from her arms, she felt lighter than she ever had, carrying not just the pot but the hope of an entire village. The laughter that once followed her every step began to fade into uneasy silence the day the pot no longer betrayed her but instead overflowed in her hands. The villagers who had once pointed fingers, who had jeered as though her broken pot reflected the brokenness of her spirit, could no longer explain what they saw. Some tried to dismiss it, saying it was luck, a trick of the light, or perhaps a coincidence brought by the rains. But as the days passed, their excuses collapsed like straw huts against a storm. The girl who had been the object of ridicule now carried in her fragile arms what looked to be the blessing of the ancestors themselves. And with every drop that poured abundantly from her cracked pot, their fear deepened. The whispers began in the marketplace, where women who once chuckled openly now lowered their voices and spoke with tight lips. "She is not ordinary," one said, eyes darting to see if anyone overheard. Another leaned closer, her voice a trembling thread. "The ancestors walk with her. That is why the pot did not break entirely. That is why it holds enough water for all." Men sitting in the shade of the baobab tree shifted uncomfortably, recalling the times they had mocked her persistence, the stones of their words still heavy with shame. The same voices that had once called her a fool now quivered as they murmured warnings, fearing that perhaps their insults had not gone unheard by the spirits. Children who once followed behind her, chanting and laughing at the trail of drips, now avoided her path. They would pause, staring wide-eyed as the cracked pot shimmered with a light not entirely from the sun, then scatter like startled birds when she turned her gaze toward them. Her steps had not changed, still steady, still humble, yet the aura around her grew heavier with each passing day, until even the most hardened elders felt it pressing against their chests. Some villagers tried to rationalize it in their fear. "It is dangerous," they said. "Water should not behave so. It flows downward, it seeps away, it does not choose to gather only in one girl's arms." They muttered of curses disguised as blessings, of powers too great to be trusted. Others countered in hushed tones, "No, it is the ancestors answering her tears. Have you not seen the way the sick recover after drinking from her pot? Have you not seen the crops turning green after she passes through the fields?" But even in their awe, there was fear, the kind that grows when human eyes witness something greater than human hands can shape. The same men who once spat at her name now approached her cautiously, their voices trembling as they asked if she might spare a drop of water for their withering goats, for their dry wells, for their parched lips. She gave without hesitation as she always had, but her generosity only deepened their unease. They had expected vengeance, punishment for their cruelty. Instead, she gave more freely than the rains, and this kindness made their guilt unbearable. To receive water from her hands was to be reminded of their scorn, and though their thirst was quenched, their spirits grew restless. At night, the village did not sleep soundly. Fires burned low, conversations circled around the same questions. Who was she truly? Was she still the broken girl they had mocked, or had the ancestors marked her as something more? Mothers pulled their children closer, warning them not to mock her again, not to even whisper about her pot. Fathers grew quiet when her name was spoken, staring into the distance as though trying to read omens in the stars. And in the silence between whispers, fear hardened into superstition. Some said her pot was not merely blessed but alive, carrying the spirit of a forgotten god. Others swore they had seen shadows move around her at dusk, as if unseen ancestors walked beside her. There were even those who began to fear that her blessing was not for the village at all, but a gift she would take away if they displeased her again. The irony weighed heavily. Once they mocked her because she carried nothing but a cracked vessel. Now they feared her because that vessel carried more than they could ever understand. Their voices trembled when they spoke of her, but their eyes followed her every step, both needing and dreading the water she brought. The girl, unaware of the storm of fear she had become, continued on her path, her hands steady around the pot that once betrayed her. But the villagers could not escape the truth. They had laughed at a girl the ancestors had chosen, and now their laughter had turned to whispers of dread that echoed louder than any jeer. The day came when envy boiled hotter than the midday sun. Her stepmother, whose tongue had once been sharp with scorn, could no longer watch silently as the villagers whispered of blessings, of sacred waters, of a girl once mocked now raised above all. The old woman's heart twisted with jealousy. If the pot brings miracles, she spat, then it belongs not to her but to the household it came from. I, the elder, should command it. She waited until the girl left for the fields, then crept into the hut, her hands trembling as she snatched the pot. She carried it to the riverbank, her breath ragged with greed. She dipped the vessel deep into the water, expecting the same glow, the same overflowing stream. But when she raised it, nothing poured forth. Instead, the pot remained stubbornly dry, not a single drop slipping past its cracks. The river mocked her with its steady flow, refusing her the sacred gift. Furious, she tried again, plunging it with force, chanting bitterly at the ancestors. Still, the vessel betrayed her. The river seemed to grow darker, colder, as if warning her to desist. Her arms weakened. She hurled the pot onto the rocks, but instead of shattering, it rolled gently back toward the girl's hut, as if the earth itself carried it home. The villagers soon learned of the theft. Murmurs spread quickly, tongues wagging like restless drums. The old woman tried to steal power not meant for her, they said. The ancestors saw. The ancestors judge. But envy is a disease that spreads. A few men, greedy and cruel, gathered in secret that night. Why should a broken girl command such power while our fields wither? They growled. If we take the pot, we shall control the rains, the healing, the blessings. Torches lit their faces as they marched to her hut. The girl awoke to footsteps, shadows pressing against her door. Her heart trembled, but the pot in her hands glowed faintly as though comforting her. They burst inside, eyes wild with hunger for what they could not understand. One of them, the tallest, snatched the pot from her arms. He raised it high, laughing. The power is ours now. But when he tipped it, not a trickle came. He shook it, pounded it, cursed the ancestors, but the vessel remained bone-dry. His companions grabbed at it in turn, each one certain that his hands would unlock the flow. Yet to each of them the pot gave nothing. Instead, their palms burned as though the clay rejected them. Some dropped it in fear, others clung desperately until their fingers blistered. The girl stood silently, her tears falling onto the ground. Where her tears touched the soil, grass sprouted, green and tender, in the middle of the dry season. The villagers who had followed the men stood frozen. Whispers rose, the ancestors bless only her. The vessel listens only to her sorrow. At that moment, the sky darkened. Clouds gathered though no rain had been seen for months. A wind howled through the village, tearing at roofs and branches. The torches of the cruel men sputtered, extinguished in an instant. Thunder rolled like the voice of the ancestors themselves. A deep dread seized the men. They dropped the pot and fell to their knees. But mercy did not come easily that night. The earth cracked beneath them, swallowing their shadows. Their fields turned to dust, their granaries empty. Livestock scattered as if driven by unseen hands. Wherever the wicked had walked, drought followed, a mark of shame burned into the land. The stepmother, pale with fear, crawled before the girl. "Forgive me," she wept, clutching at the girl's feet. "I only wanted what you had. I did not know the ancestors chose you." The girl's eyes glistened, not with pride but with sorrow. She lifted the pot gently, and in her hands it brimmed once more, spilling with cool, glowing water. She poured it upon the ground where her stepmother knelt, and flowers bloomed instantly, encircling the old woman in a ring of beauty and shame. "It is not mine," the girl whispered, her voice steady. "It was never meant to be stolen. It belongs to those who carry kindness in their hearts." The villagers bowed their heads. The cruel men fled, exiled not by force but by the unbearable weight of their disgrace. Wherever they wandered, no well quenched their thirst, no land yielded them grain. They became outcasts, marked forever by their greed. From that day no one dared mock the girl again. The pot remained with her, but more than that, the people began to see that the true miracle was not the clay vessel, but the heart that held it. For the ancestors had not chosen the pot, they had chosen her. And those who tried to take what was sacred learned that blessings cannot be stolen, only honored. The story of the girl and her leaking pot did not end in her small village. Like the ripples that spread across a lake when a single stone is cast, her tale began to move from mouth to mouth, from elder to child, from traveler to stranger. What had once been whispered in mockery, "The broken girl with the broken pot," was now spoken with awe and trembling. For the pot had done what no hand of man or woman could accomplish. It had poured life into a land that was dying, it had revealed blessings where others saw only shame. The elders, humbled by what they had witnessed, called the people together beneath the great tree in the center of the village. There they declared that the girl was not cursed but chosen. "The ancestors have used her weakness as a vessel," they proclaimed, "and through her patience the land has been restored." Children, who once pointed at her and laughed, now followed her steps in silence, hoping to catch sight of the flowers that bloomed wherever her water dripped. Women who had turned her away from their homes now sought her advice in times of illness or hunger. Men who once mocked her father for raising a useless daughter, now bowed their heads when she passed, ashamed of their cruelty. But the girl herself did not boast. She carried the pot as she always had, balanced gently upon her head, letting the water spill wherever it wished to go. When asked what secret power she carried, she only smiled and said, "The pot is broken and so am I." But even the broken can carry blessings if they are willing to walk the road set before them. Her humility became part of her legend, for she did not claim ownership of the miracle but pointed always to the unseen hands of the ancestors. Travelers from other lands began to arrive, curious to see the girl with the leaking pot. They listened to her story, carried it home, and retold it by their own firesides. Soon, villages far beyond her own spoke of the broken pot that bloomed with flowers, of the overflowing miracle that healed the sick and brought rains to thirsty soil. Some villages painted her likeness on their walls, others wove her story into songs. In every place it reached, the tale carried a lesson that people took to heart, that weakness is not always what it seems, and that patience may carry hidden treasures. Her stepmother and those who had been cruel to her remained silent, for shame had fallen upon them heavier than drought. Whenever they tried to speak against her, their words dried up in their mouths. Some claimed they saw the ancestors watching them in dreams, their eyes glowing with disapproval. Over time, the stepmother faded into the shadows of the tale, remembered only as the one who tried to steal blessings but found nothing but dryness in her hands. Her cruelty became a warning to others. Greed and mockery cannot steal what patience and truth have been given. Years passed, but the girl's name never left the lips of her people. She became not just a daughter of her father, but a daughter of the land, a living proof that what is despised by men may be honored by the ancestors. And so, when the rains fell in abundance and crops filled the granaries, the elders would remind the young, "Do not forget the broken pot, for it is the reason we eat today." Mothers told their daughters, "If you are mocked, walk on with courage, perhaps your weakness hides a blessing." Fathers told their sons, "Never raise your hand in scorn against the vulnerable, for you may strike the one chosen to save you." In time, the tale was shaped into a proverb, repeated at gatherings and woven into songs. Even a leaking pot may overflow with blessings when carried with patience and truth. This saying became a guiding light for the people. When someone stumbled in their tasks, the elders would nod and say, "Perhaps the pot is leaking." When someone's effort brought unexpected good, they would add, "But see, the flowers bloom." And when someone endured hardship with dignity, the people would remind each other, "Carry your pot, for blessings may yet overflow." Thus, the girl's story became larger than herself. It was not only about a single broken pot but about the strength hidden in weakness, about the way the ancestors weave beauty from what seems useless. It became a story for all who felt mocked, forgotten, or despised. It became a hope for those who believed themselves broken beyond repair. And it remained, for generations, a legend whispered by fires, sung in fields and carried in hearts. A reminder that even the cracked, the leaking, and the weak may be vessels of overflowing miracles.